My name is Amelia Grant, and I'm 31 years old. If you had asked me as a child what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would have told you, a singer. I dreamed of standing on stage under golden lights, holding the room in silence with nothing but my voice. But life doesn't always honor childhood dreams. After college, I found myself working as a credit officer at a small bank in Charleston. It wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't music, but it was steady. It wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't music, but it was steady. The job paid my student loans and gave me something close to stability. Then, at a college reunion hosted by an old friend, I met him, Ethan Ward. Ethan wasn't the loudest person in the room, but he had a way of pulling you into his orbit. Charming, easy laughter, quick wit. We got paired together in a silly celebrity guessing game, and when our eyes met, it felt like he already knew me. Later that night, he asked what my dreams had been once upon a time. I admitted the truth about singing, expecting him to laugh. Instead, his eyes softened. He told me he'd once danced in a college crew, but gave it up to please his parents. That was the first thread between us, the sense that we had both sacrificed who we really were for responsibility. We started dating soon after. Ethan swept me off my feet with outdoor dinners, surprise gifts, even a pair of studio-quality headphones because he knew I still hummed to myself while folding laundry. My mother was thrilled. She'd been asking for years when I'd finally settle down, give her grandkids. I wasn't sure I was ready, but Ethan had a way of softening my doubts. A year later, we got married. At first, it felt like the beginning of the life I'd always wanted. Ethan worked at a financial consulting firm with a solid salary. He told me I'd earned the right to rest after years of pushing myself, so I quit my bank job. I thought I was stepping into a new chapter where I could nurture a family, maybe even pick up music again. But marriage isn't just about two people, it's about the families they bring with them. And I was about to learn that marrying Ethan also meant marrying into a family with rules, hierarchies, and secrets. Ethan's mother, Margaret Ward, was a woman of sharp glances and sharper words. Every time I stepped into her home, I felt as though I were back in school, about to be graded. Nothing escaped her notice. The way towels were folded, how shoes were placed by the door, whether the cutlery shone properly on the table. Once, after dinner, she looked at me across the table and said flatly, "If your husband looks careless, Amelia, people will think you're careless." A wife reflects her husband. I smiled politely, hiding the sting in my chest. Ethan sat beside me, silent. Then there was Clara, Ethan's younger sister. From the start, the family explained Clara's situation with hushed voices and pitying sighs. A high fever at age 8, nerve damage, they said. Since then, Clara couldn't walk or speak. I imagined her world as a prison, silent, motionless. But when I met her, I was surprised. She wasn't sorrowful. She communicated through sketches and a letterboard. And her eyes were alive. One afternoon, I sat with her on the porch. I drew a musical note in the air, silly and childlike. Clara smiled, then drew a heart on her pad. In that moment, we shared something quiet, something real. If Clara was a hidden light, Margaret was a storm always watching for a chance to snuff it out. And Ethan had begun to fade. The man who once brought me flowers now came home late, distracted, distant. And I had no idea then that Clara, the girl dismissed as silent, would be the one to open my eyes to the truth this family had been hiding. I used to believe marriage was just two people learning each other's rhythms, favorite breakfasts, quiet moods, how to share a blanket without a tug-of-war. I didn't understand the other truth. Some marriages come with an operating manual written long before you arrive. In the Ward house, that manual had one author, Margaret. Her rules were invisible until you broke them. On Sundays, we were expected at the big White House on Meeting Street by 2 o'clock sharp. No one said it out loud. It simply was, I'd carry a pie or a salad I'd painstakingly prepared, and Margaret would lift the foil, inhale, and give a verdict without making eye contact. "Sweetness is heavy," she said once, sliding my pecan pie to the far end of the counter like a failed test paper. "People prefer balance." Ethan kissed my temple as if to soften the blow, then drifted after his father to talk markets in the den. It didn't occur to him that I was left standing in a stranger's kitchen being audited. The house itself was immaculate in a way that felt more museum than home. No smudges on framed photographs, no stray pens on side tables, towels folded with military precision. If I hung a hand towel with the seam facing outward, Margaret refolded it with a sigh that carried 1,000 unspoken corrections. I learned quickly that praise wasn't the currency here. Compliance was. And then there was Clara. Clara's small sitting room overlooked the camellias in the back garden. Sunlight collected on her lap like warm water. She communicated with a letterboard and sketches, breezy cottages, birds in flight, a violin with strings so delicately crosshatched you could almost hear it hum. Her wheelchair faced the window most afternoons, her hands loose in her lap until I arrived. Then she'd brighten and tap the armrest twice. Her hello. Over time, we built a quiet routine that existed under Margaret's radar. I'd bring a thermos of chai. Clara would slide her sketchbook across the quilt and point to details she wanted me to notice. The flick of a bird's tail, the tiny cleft tucked into a tree knot. I began learning a few signs at home. Thank you, music, safe. And when I used them, Clara's smile arrived like a secret suddenly visible. With Ethan, the rhythm was different. He came home later. Little things went missing. The way he used to leave me notes in the fruit bowl, the way he lifted my chin and said, "Sing something." When I asked if everything was all right, he said it was work. He said it the way people say, "It might rain." Not a warning, not an invitation to talk, just a fact that changed the shape of our day. I told myself not to take it personally. I had quit my job. I could keep home fires burning. I could give him ease. But ease never seemed to make him stay. One Thursday, I stopped by the ward house with groceries because Margaret had mentioned a dinner. She hadn't asked for help. She never did. She expected it. "You're early," she said, glancing at the clock, though I was 10 minutes late. "We'll plate in courses. Ethan prefers order. Ethan prefers order. Ethan prefers balance. Ethan prefers the linen pressed, the wine decanted, silence where a wife's opinion might go." I wondered when his preferences had gotten so heavy that I couldn't lift anything else. I found relief in Clara's room. I wheeled her closer to the table by the window and opened my bag like a magician. A tiny Bluetooth speaker, a handful of watercolor half pans, a round brush wrapped in a bandana. Clara lit up, tapping the armrest. Yes, yes, yes. I played a Chopin nocturne softly and dipped the brush. Clara watched every stroke, then tapped letters on her board. SOFTSKY. I wrote it in the corner and blew it dry. For 20 minutes, we lived in a world where Margaret's footsteps were just weather in another country. Then the door clicked. Margaret stood there with her tired smile that never reached her eyes. "Music travels," she said, meaning turn it off. "It excites the dog." The Ward family did not own a dog. I clicked the speaker silent and folded my bandana. Clara's hand found my sleeve, a squeeze, quick and apologetic. Later, when I brought her water, she tapped out a soirée and rolled her eyes toward the hallway. I shook my head and signed "Not you." She lifted the corner of her mouth in a look that said, "I know," and then drew a small heart on the condensation ring my cup had left. She nudged it toward me like a talisman. It kept me brave exactly until Saturday. Saturday was when the balance in our marriage broke and I noticed the precision with which it had been calibrated. I was rearranging the bookcase at home, our home, not Margaret's museum, when Ethan came in and watched me move a stack of poetry from one shelf to another. "Mom keeps her hardcovers by height," he said, as if sharing a weather report. "Looks cleaner." "Your mom also keeps the pantry organized by barcode," I said lightly. "This is our house." He made a face I hadn't seen before, half shrug, half apology he didn't feel. "It was a suggestion. From your mother, Amelia." He exhaled, the warning wrapped in my name. Her standards work. My standards, then, were not standards. They were noise. That night, he came home late again. I waited on the couch until midnight, pretending to read. When the door finally opened, he was more surprised to see me awake than sorry to be late. He kissed my hair and said he was beat. He slept like a stone. I lay beside him, hearing water run in pipes that should have been quiet. The next morning at Margaret's Sunday meal, the table talk hummed around me, but never through me. They discussed investments, the firm's new partner, a restaurant that had lost its touch. When I said the seared peaches tasted like summer even in March, Margaret's eyebrows lifted a fraction. It wasn't a compliment she recognized. It wasn't her language. After dessert, I slipped away to Clara's room, where the sunlight cut a gold square on the carpet. Clara tapped the armrest twice, hello, and then 3 times, impatient, where have you been? I laughed despite myself and showed her a new sign I'd practiced all week. Friend. Her face shifted. Surprise, pride, gratitude. Then she mirrored it back, slow and careful, so I would never forget. On the drive home, Ethan asked if I'd remembered to drop the cufflinks at the dry cleaner. I had not. He sighed like a door closing. Mom keeps a calendar, he said. I kept quiet. It was the safest answer in this family. Silence that didn't disturb the picture. But silence has gravity. It pulls at everything until you feel yourself bending. Mine bent toward Clara, toward the only person in that house who seemed to see me as more than an accessory in service of Ethan's shine. Weeks passed. I started stopping by on weekdays to check on Clara, though we both knew I was checking on myself. I brought her a tiny whiteboard, and we practiced letters the way conspirators practice escape routes. She was lightning with a marker, sharp, economical, funny. Sometimes she'd sketch a caricature of Margaret's eyebrows and hand me the pen. I'd add a tiny crown. Clara would press her lips together to stifle a laugh, eyes gleaming. We became fluent in a language that didn't exist before we made it. And then, late one afternoon, I was rinsing teacups in Margaret's kitchen when a glossy brochure slid onto the counter beside my hands. Ocean. Palms. A hibiscus pinned to a sunset. Hawaii, Margaret said in a voice so neutral it had to be loaded. Family tradition to travel in spring. I wiped my fingers, heart picking up a confused rhythm. That sounds beautiful. It will be, she said, folding the brochure precisely. For those going. I waited an invitation, a plan, a we. None arrived. Only her eyes, measuring how gracefully I could take a hint. I thought of Clara's sunlight square, our whiteboard jokes, the tiny heart on a water ring. I thought of the calendar that was not mine and a bookcase sorted by heights I did not choose. That night, Ethan came home early for the first time in weeks. He didn't kiss my hair. He set his phone on the table and said, "Do you have plans next week?" My answer was no. Of course it was no. In this family, my job was to be available. He nodded, relieved, and that was all the warning I got. The brochure sat in our kitchen like a secret too loud to ignore. I asked Ethan casually over dinner, grilled salmon, his favorite, if he was excited about Hawaii. He shifted in his chair, focused on cutting his food into precise bites. "It'll be good to reset," he said finally. "We." I pressed. He looked up with a blink that made it clear. "No, not we. Mom thought it would be easier this way," he added. "She wants you to stay here with Clara. You two get along, don't you?" The words landed like a slap wrapped in velvet. Clara, the sister-in-law I adored, wasn't the issue. It was the assumption, the quiet exclusion. His family was flying to paradise while I stayed behind to play caretaker. I swallowed the sting and said, "Sounds like you already made the decision without me." Ethan exhaled through his nose, the way he always did when he thought I was being unreasonable. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. It's just 1 week." Just 1 week. A phrase that stretched like a crack across the surface of our marriage. In the days that followed, Ethan was present in body, but absent in spirit. He answered questions with one-word replies, smiled without his eyes, and slipped his phone into his pocket when I walked into the room. I told myself I was imagining it. That stress at work could explain late nights, unreadable expressions. But deep down, the certainty bloomed like a bruise. Something was slipping away. I tried to mend the space between us. I planned dinners, lit candles, even sang softly while folding laundry, a habit he once adored. He didn't notice. Or if he did, he didn't say. Margaret, on the other hand, noticed everything. She appeared at our apartment one Wednesday evening with a bag of groceries and a thin smile. "Thought I'd save you a trip," she said, brushing past me without waiting for an invitation. She unpacked with military precision, apples aligned by color, pasta sorted by thickness. As I watched, she glanced at the bookshelf Ethan had commented on weeks before. "You still keep them by author?" she asked, lifting an eyebrow. "Yes," I said simply. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Ethan prefers order. You'll learn." I wanted to shout that this was my home too. Instead, I folded my arms and let her words hang in the air like smoke. That night, when I told Ethan, he just shrugged. "That's Mom. Don't overthink it. Don't overthink it." A phrase I was learning to despise. The only place I felt whole anymore was with Clara. When Margaret wasn't hovering, I slipped into Clara's room with chai or watercolor pans. She'd greet me with her double tap, "Hello," and push her sketchbook toward me eagerly. One afternoon, I showed her the sign for friend. She gasped, covered her mouth in mock drama, then mirrored it back carefully. She tapped on her letterboard, FRIENDFOREVER. I laughed so hard tears pricked my eyes. In a house where words were used to wound or correct, Clara's silent language healed me. But Clara wasn't always lighthearted. Some days she sketched darker things. A bird in a cage, a woman under rain. When I pointed to them with concern, she'd shake her head quickly, scribble a flower in the margin, and flash me a reassuring smile. I began to wonder what storms lived inside her that no one else bothered to see. 2 nights before the Hawaii trip, I stopped by with pumpkin bread, Clara's favorite. As I stepped inside the Ward house, I heard laughter from the living room. Ethan's laughter. I hadn't heard that sound in weeks. I paused in the hallway. There he was, sitting beside Margaret, grinning at something on her phone. Their heads bent close, their ease with each other cutting me like glass. When he finally noticed me, his face shuddered. "You're here tonight?" he asked, as if I were the intruder. "I brought this for Clara," I said, setting the bread on the table. Margaret's smile was thin, deliberate. "Family can come by any time," she said warmly, but I knew the warmth wasn't meant for me. I found Clara by her window, hugging a pillow. She looked up, eyes full of questions. "I'm fine," I signed, though my hands trembled. She tilted her head, gaze sharp in a way that unsettled me. For someone labeled silent, Clara saw everything. Back home that night, I asked Ethan the question I'd been holding back. "Is there something you're not telling me?" He flinched, then forced a chuckle. "What kind of question is that?" "I just feel like you're not here anymore." "Not fully." He sighed, staring at the floor. "It's just work. Don't overthink it." There it was again. That phrase, slamming the door in my face. I said nothing more, but in my chest something shifted. Doubt hardened into suspicion, and suspicion whispered the truth I didn't want to face. I wasn't losing Ethan to work. I was losing him to his family, and maybe to something even darker. And Clara, the one they all dismissed as broken, was the only one who might hold the key to the truth. The morning of the Hawaii trip dawned bright, but my chest felt heavy. Ethan moved through the apartment briskly, avoiding my eyes as he double-checked his luggage. Margaret's car idled outside, its engine humming like an impatient reminder. "You'll take good care of Clara," Ethan said casually, kissing my cheek. It was a gesture without warmth, a ritual performed for appearances. Before I could answer, he was gone. And just like that, I was left behind. I told myself at least it meant days without Margaret's constant scrutiny. Maybe I could enjoy quiet moments with Clara, but the sting of exclusion burned deep. That afternoon, I carried my overnight bag into the Ward house. Clara was already waiting by the window, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. "I'll be here with you for a while." I signed gently. Her hands paused on the letterboard. She blinked, then spelled something that made my stomach twist. THEYLEFTYOUBHINDAGAN. I froze. Again, the word hung in the air. Before I could ask, Clara's eyes gleamed, and she tapped quickly. WEHAVEPLANSTOO. I laughed softly, thinking she meant baking or sketching. But Clara's smile had an edge I had never seen before. The next morning, I brought her coffee, like always. She pushed herself upright in bed, and what happened next shattered the world I thought I knew. Clara spoke. Her voice was soft but clear. "Calm down. Don't freak out." The cup nearly slipped from my hands. "Clara, you can talk?" And then she swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood. Walked. No tremor, no hesitation. "I never lost it," she said simply. "Not speech, not movement. I pretended. For years." The air left my lungs. I remembered the times I had pushed her wheelchair, interpreted her drawings, defended her against Margaret's coldness. All of it an act? Why? I finally breathed. Clara's face hardened. "Because Margaret made me a prisoner. When I was 10, I had a fever. She didn't take me to the hospital in time. After my father died, she told everyone I had permanent damage. Easier that way for her to keep control. No one questioned it. I realized if I pretended, they ignored me. And if they ignored me, I could survive." I sank into the nearest chair, the room spinning. All these years. Her eyes softened. "I kept the act because it was safer. But you treated me like a person. You gave me dignity. And now it's time for them to pay." Clara opened a suitcase hidden in her closet. Inside were files, journals, even recordings. I've been gathering evidence. Mom's financial manipulations, Ethan's lies, the way they've used people like pawns. They think I'm silent, but I've been listening. Watching. My heart pounded. "Why tell me now?" "Because they left you behind," she said simply. "That means you're not one of them. You're with me." I stared at her. This sister-in-law who had fooled everyone, who had lived in silence to survive, now standing tall like a general ready for war. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. Her lips curved into a thin smile. "Stand beside me. And when they come back, we'll end their game." A week later, Margaret, Ethan, and the rest of the wards returned from Hawaii glowing with tans and carrying bags of souvenirs. They walked into the house to find Clara seated upright at the table, no wheelchair in sight, a stack of papers neatly arranged before her. Margaret froze. "Clara? What is this?" Ethan laughed nervously. "Is this some kind of joke?" Then Clara spoke. Her voice filled the room like thunder in a cathedral. "No joke. Just the truth you buried for 15 years." Margaret staggered backward, as if the words themselves had struck her. Ethan's face strained of color. Clara laid out everything, how Margaret had lied about her condition, how she had hidden money from her late husband's estate, how Ethan had covered for her manipulations to secure his inheritance. There were bank statements, letters, even recordings of whispered conversations Margaret thought no one else could hear. "You thought I was silent," Clara said evenly, her eyes burning. "But I was watching. And Amelia was the only one who saw me as human. That's why she's here. And that's why you're finished." Margaret sputtered, but the evidence was undeniable. Ethan's father's estate, the money, even parts of Ethan's career, it was all tied to deceit. I stood beside Clara, my heart racing, as Ethan turned to me with wide eyes. How could you go along with this?" I met his gaze, my voice steady for the first time in years. "Because unlike you, Ethan, I don't betray the people who trust me." The days that followed were chaos. Lawyers, investigations, neighbors whispering as news spread about the lies in the Ward family. Margaret's influence crumbled. Ethan's career faltered under the shadow of scandal. And through it all, Clara stood tall, no longer silent, no longer hidden. As for me, I packed my bags. Ethan begged at first, then raged, then fell silent. But I didn't waver. I had given everything to a family that saw me as disposable. Now it was my turn to choose myself. When I walked out of that house for the last time, Clara pressed something into my hand, a small sketch of a bird, wings spread wide, escaping a cage. "Freedom looks good on you," she whispered. I smiled, tears burning my eyes. "On you too." People always ask why women like me stay. Why we bend, compromise, swallow our pride. The truth is simple: Because love blinds us, because families bind us, because silence feels safer than confrontation. But silence is not survival. I learned that from Clara, the sister-in-law everyone thought was broken, who had the courage to hide her strength until the moment it could burn brightest. And in the end, revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was simple. It was truth revealed. Masks ripped off. Lies collapsing under their own weight. As I built a new life far from Charleston, I realized I had something Margaret never could control, something Ethan never could take: my voice. And when I finally began to sing again, even just humming in the kitchen of my tiny new apartment, I thought of Clara's words. Freedom looked good on both of us.